entrepreneurs on the patient. The company that makes this is iRhythm. They're based in San Francisco. She found out I talked about burnout, and she said, I need your help because I work with the EP physicians at Stanford, and they like the concept, but they're struggling to actually use it because they tell me I can't do one more additional thing in my practice. And the thought of having real-time, irregular heartbeats being transmitted to me, and I'm going to have to react to that on top of everything else I'm reacting to, is not something I'm ready to take on, even though I know it's going to be better for my patient. So the message here is that burnout stifles innovation. And our opportunity to address burnout is vast if we can actually deal with it effectively. The question is, how did this happen? Now, a lot of people talk about burnout, and they think we've got all these great clinicians. If they could just be more resilient, if they could just be stronger, we could deal with it and we could move on. But we've already got the most resilient people on the planet who are working as clinicians. You know, who else has passed organic chemistry, passed an MCAT, gone through medical school, residency, oftentimes a fellowship, and then is out practicing, and still while they're practicing, they're working 14 hours a day, 5 to 7 days a week. These are resilient people. The problem aren't the people. The problem is the toxic workplace that we put them in. A workplace that hinders them from doing their mission in life, their desire to connect directly with their patient, to have a deep personal bond, to make a true difference with an intervention that they present. They can't do this because these workplaces are full of chaos, of barriers, of frustrations. And it's that frustration that drives the doctors crazy. And it actually creates toxicity. We'll talk about this, about when I use that word toxicity, it is not used lightly because it is actually damaging physicians as well as hurting performance for organizations and service to patients. So then the question becomes, how did this workplace, a hospital, a place people go to for healing, how did it become so toxic? Is it because the CEOs get up in the morning and think, what can I do to make my doctors and nurses go crazy today? What can I do to frustrate the heck out of them? No, they're thinking about, what can I do to deal with all the external factors that have been impinging upon healthcare for the last 15 years? About the EHR, about meaningless abuse, about ICD-10, being used by the payers to deny payment or to demand more prior authorizations. Of course, the government's gotten into the act with all of these acronyms that they've got, including one that drives us crazy, which is HCAHPS, CGCAHPS, that's patient satisfaction scores. And when you go to talk to a doctor about their struggling patient satisfaction score, they will tell you, my patients are getting older, they're getting sicker, they're more linguistically and ethnically diverse. It's really hard to take care of them. And even the ones who are absolutely culturally consistent with us have consulted Dr. Google and don't come in asking for our advice. They come in telling us what they want us to prescribe for them. Oftentimes that's opioids. We used to give them lots of opioids. Pain was the fifth vital sign. We had to treat it. Now we've realized there's this crisis. We have to deny opioids. When we deny opioids, patients get mad. Some of them come back and wreak violence in our workplace. So maybe we should get rid of patient satisfaction scores and all that star system stuff. Yeah, problem is there's another star system out there. You maybe have used it yourself sometime in the last week or so. But the question for anybody in healthcare, I'd ask you, have you Yelped yourself to see your organization or your practice? Because you're probably in there and you may not even know it. And you can get, you know, Yelp is as reliable as the patient satisfaction scores. Patients don't necessarily comment on what exactly happened in that visit, but they come up with something and they feel passionately they need to say it, and so it's out there. So leaders will think, this is too hard to deal with. If I'm going to have any of a chance of surviving, I'm going to have to get bigger so I've got better negotiating power in the marketplace. So let's just merge and acquire and grow bigger and bigger. Providence St. Joe is an excellent example of that. As Bon Secours, Mercy, you name it. It's happening everywhere. So the C-suite now is busy just trying to manage the business at a global level, they're not really connected to this at the front lines. Fortunately, we do have our specialty societies, which give us maintenance of certification exams that kind of sort of demonstrate whether we're still competent or not. But we spend hundreds of dollars, or hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars actually completing these. In all of that, we can get some solace in the fact that we're getting paid less for everything we do. So, when you look at that and you realize we started as clinicians in the middle of that circle just wanting to take care of patients. We absorbed every single one of those things, and we could probably go around the room and everybody could add something else unique to this circle. This is not a comprehensive list by any means. But we absorbed each one as it came along, as long as we could still have that relationship with our patient, as long as we could still use the skills that we had acquired. But we've gotten to a point where there are too many of these now. We've gotten to a point where we have added the last straw and people are breaking. We're seeing doctors and nurses with depression, substance abuse, family dysfunction, and suicide. And it just can't go on. So how does burnout stifle innovation? Well, most people are aware there's these three things with burnout. There's exhaustion. I just don't have anything left to give. There's depersonalization or cynicism. If I don't have anything left to give, I'm going to protect myself from my organization, protect myself from my patient, because I can't give anymore. And when I can't give anymore and I'm protecting myself, well, I don't feel like I'm making a difference. Those are the three components of burnout. Most people are somewhat aware of these or well aware of them by now. The thing people don't often think about as much is what's actually causing those three things to occur. And one of the fortunate things about this work I've done is I've gotten to know Christina Maslach pretty well. She was a professor at Berkeley. She lives in San Francisco now, right off Lombard, the curviest street in the world. And she and her partner, Michael Leiter, identified 6 key drivers of burnout. The first is work overload. And in healthcare, it's worse because we're in chaotic, time-pressured environments. And additionally, lately, there's this challenge with information overload as well. But when we're overloaded, we feel as though we're out of control. And loss of control is the second driver of burnout. Control is a big deal to us as doctors. We believe in autonomy, and we've given the decade of our 20s to get the knowledge and skills, so when a patient needs us to take control, we can do that with assurance that we're doing the right thing. In fact, that control is one of the intangible rewards we thought we were signing up for when we committed to become physicians. And insufficient reward is the next driver of burnout. In addition to control, we're looking for professional recognition. And one of the things I really enjoyed is collegiality with my colleagues. But what we're seeing is we have no time to get together. So we're seeing breakdown of community. What used to be there isn't there anymore. We don't have the time to get together. As we're not connected with each other, we start to engender the next driver of burnout, which is absence of fairness. If we're not sure our life sucks, we don't know if the next person's life sucks or if it sucks as much. Are they getting some special deal? We just are not connected very well, especially in times when there's so much change happening. If there's not good communication between the people making the decisions and the people living with those decisions, if there's not a lot of trust between those two entities, this whole question of fairness becomes a real issue. And it's even worse. From the challenge, it's worse now. I think it's a wonderful thing. But the diversity of providers, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, has become greater and greater and has led to conditions which myself, as I call myself a pale, stale male, I'm an old white guy, nobody ever challenged my authority. I didn't have to be twice as good as somebody else in order to be thought to be equal to them, like many people in our workforces are now. I think fairness is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. And lastly, it's a whole challenge of conflicting values. If my health system says our goal is to be 75th to 90th percentile in performance, you name the metric, and nobody has ever said we're going to be 35th percentile in performance. But oftentimes we get 35th to 25th percentile resource with which to achieve those high levels of performance. We see a conflict in the values. And we wonder if this is a place that we really belong. What Maslach found is that there's actually a link between specific drivers of burnout and specific manifestations. So the overload actually drives exhaustion. And as I look around, as I go around and work with health systems around the country, I don't see any health system that doesn't have exhaustion as a major component of their manifestations of burnout. I do see, so that's there for everybody. The depersonalization, though, is actually driven by the other 5 drivers of burnout. So there are industries or some places where people aren't necessarily overworked, but if you don't feel like you fit in that office and your boss sucks, you can be burned out, cynical, and depersonalized without actually having too much to do. So there's different ways it manifests. And there are specific things we can do if we think about these carefully to understand what are the drivers in this location that we can then bring an intervention that can make an impact. And that's really the next question, is what do you do? Because we are faced with this, we can't just deal with, we can't just accept it. What I like to recommend is that we take a process where we actually work out a plan for an entity that wants to engage. Because burnout is everywhere, but the drivers differ from place to place. But we start just like we start with a patient, with a diagnostic and treatment plan. The diagnosis includes burnout surveys. It also should include a survey that looks for the drivers of burnout, not just the manifestations of burnout. But we want to understand what is the performance factors of this organization. In quality, satisfaction, and financial. If we reduce burnout, but we hurt the operating margin of the organization, so it can't stay viable, we're not going to be successful in the long run. We've got to find ways to beat burnout while we actually build the bottom line. We also want to look at leadership. What is the quality of leadership? Because we can do a lot to improve leadership quality. We want to understand how well the EHR is working. Epic and Cerner both have mechanisms in them that you can look and see how many of our docs are working after hours, how much are they doing that, how efficiently are they using the product, what specific areas are they having trouble with that we can address. And then one thing that is unique and very helpful is to take the C-level leaders who aren't seeing patients and have them shadow clinicians who are seeing patients, so that it's not just the reports that they're seeing, but they actually get to witness the impact of burnout while in the native environment. That sort of thing can create a whole other level of engagement when we do that in the process of preparing to develop a plan. The key components of the plan, very much following Tate Shanafelt right here at Stanford's recommendations, are to provide support, personal resilience, to fix the clinical workplace, efficiency of practice, and to do what I call information age, change leadership to information age leadership. Tate calls it the culture of wellness. Providing support is absolutely vital. Even if we fix the practice site so it's perfectly efficient and functional, and management is wonderfully supportive, we still deal with severe illness, life and death. And people need support when they're dealing with that kind of serious issue. So creating a Center for Wellbeing and having that be a true support to every clinician in the organization is absolutely vital. And then we need to fix the workplace. I don't know how many of you have seen this picture. It was published in JAMA in 2012. There was a pediatric patient who was truly loved and appreciated her doctor. And so she drew this picture to thank him for his wonderful care. And you can see her sitting on the end of the exam table. Her sister's reading her a book, her mother's with a sibling in back, and the doctor's on the other end of the picture, facing away from the patient, typing on the screen, typing on the keyboard, looking at the screen, and for some reason smiling. We haven't figured out why he's smiling. When he saw this picture, he was appalled, and he realized he needed to change his practice style, because he was well loved as the kind of pediatrician that would get down on his knees to meet his patients face to face, eye to eye. So we need to fix this, but we've all probably lived this if we're clinicians at some point in our career. So how do we fix the workplace? There's 2 broad areas to work on this in. The first is to fix what we have control over in our own clinical site, which is a daily huddle that can do a number of things. First, it can look at the start of the day. Do we have the capacity to meet the demand that's coming at us? What's the schedule? What's our staffing? How's our equipment? Do we have the supplies we need? That sort of thing. Second thing, what went wrong yesterday that drove me crazy? And I swore I'd never let it happen again, but I forgot it by the next day, and it's going to bug me again a week from now. If I can capture that and bring it to the huddle the next morning, we can start to work on plans to fix those little things, pebbles in the shoes, we call it. And then those things that we can't fix at the front lines, we can escalate through a system of tiered huddles, actually all the way to the C-suite if it needs to get there. The second process is actually deeply redesigning the workflows. Because we can tweak around the edges and make it work better, but we can actually do things that are pretty dramatic to change the way we work now. And in doing that, free up resources that may be tied up at the front desk that doesn't really need as many people working at the front desk if we redesign that. They can come back and help support the clinicians in the clinical spaces instead. So we have looking at things like team care, providing more support to each physician. Because we're able to do that actually completely financially, at least break even, if not actually do better. Optimizing the EHR, fixing in-basket management, and working on facility design to have people work together better. These are big picture, deep changes that usually go through a kind of we call them a value stream analysis. You put every step up on the wall, you identify where there's waste, you work on ways to remove that. As innovators, this is pretty important because if you can think about your innovation and how it integrates into the workflow, and then either as you're planning it to get launched at the pilot site, use that workflow redesign to make sure it's going to implement well. And then as you go live, actually using the daily huddles to identify those unanticipated problems that come up and rapidly fix them, it makes tremendous difference. And I've personally experienced this launching software at Sutter Gould when I was CEO there. And then lastly is the management system and culture. And what I like to talk about is we need to move from industrial age management to information age management. Industrial age management, for those who have done business school, there's a Sloan management approach, command and control. It worked fantastically when people were on assembly lines and all we needed to do was make sure they did exactly what we told them to do. What we found though is that we thought it worked fantastically in industry. In some ways it did, but in fact, as even industry got more advanced, finding a way to empower people on the front lines and align them with our goals truly made a difference. And that's the information age leadership that we'll talk about now. I like to think of it as, and I've been a big advocate of lean leadership. And a lot of people will look at me and say, wait a minute, lean leadership, Paul, you're crazy. Lean is mean. You know, lean's caused layoffs. Lean's made people crazy. You know, if somebody's walking around with a stopwatch, watching what you're doing, what the heck? And in fact, if we focus on productivity, if that's our focus in lean, lean is mean because it is oppressive, it is controlling. But there's a different approach. At the heart of lean is something very different. And it's really principle-based. So one question to think about is what's more important than productivity? Who's in a hospital or a medical clinic, who is the most important person in that organization? The patient. The patient. Front desk is second. The patient is the most important person in the organization. Without the patient, we have no reason to exist. And then the question is, what's the most important thing that happens to that most important person? And it's a healing interaction that takes place between everyone on the front lines of care and the patient. It's something that reduces anxiety and worry, relieves pain and suffering, does a definitive procedure to make someone better, educates them to be healthier. All those people on the top line there are doing that. Doctors, nurses, receptionists, transport people, you name it. For myself as a family doc practicing for 25 years, I probably had close to 100,000 healing interactions. As I became the CEO, the person at the bottom, I stopped seeing patients. I wasn't no longer doing the most important thing for the most important person in my organization. My job was to make sure that those people on the front line had what they needed so they could do that as effectively as possible. And that's the question, is how do we get there? And we do it best when we start at a cultural level of respect for people. One of the favorite people I know in this realm is a guy named Bob Chapman. Anybody know who Bob Chapman is? Bob Chapman runs a heavy equipment manufacturing firm called Barry Way Miller. They make stuff like bottle washers for Budweiser. They're actually based in St. Louis. But he now has 80 plants in 17 countries around the world, about 3,000 employees, about $3 billion a year in net revenue, outperforms Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway in return on equity. He's done it because he realized if he really cared about his family members and some close friends, but he didn't treat his employees in the same way that he cared about his family members and his close friends. When the business cycle got tough, he'd lay off his employees. He never laid off his family members. And he thought, what would be different if we could actually treat all of each other with that same level of care? Because every single one of my employees has family members who care about them like that. What if we could create that level of caring inside our company? What would that do? So he worked on it at his local office in St. Louis and then decided to spread it around the world in his companies. And he needed a system to do that, so he used Lean as the management system to do that. He documents it in this book called Everybody Matters. I encourage people to read that book before they read this book because it's so good about how to approach this in the proper way. And he's got a great website, Truly Human Leadership. Right here in Silicon Valley, the business school at Stanford, we've got someone who's an expert on disrespect for people. And that's Jeff Pfeffer. I don't know if anybody know Jeff. He's amazing. And his book that just came out recently called Dying for a Paycheck is also well worth the read. Because he talks about all the things that happen to us when we're in a company that is not respecting us, that's not taking care of us, and that's making and actually causing illness. We think about having chief wellness officers in large corporations. Many of them are focused on having you get out and exercise, build a gym, eat well, all that stuff. In fact, if we can simply, and what they found is the companies that can create this anti-burnout approach to management do far more to reduce the risk of adverse health effects than any wellness program that gets tried to be put on top of that. And how do we do that? Well, we start at the culture level with things like mission, vision, and values. Most doctors, you go talk to a doctor and say, hey, you want to talk about our mission, our vision, and our values? They're going to run the other way as fast as they can. It's the last thing they want to do. I've got a whole bunch of charts to do in Epic. I've got all this other stuff to do. I'm not going to talk about mission, vision, values. Yet, more and more, we're actually all in these organizations that have come together through acquisition. We think because we're all doctors, we have the same values. In fact, many of our organizations don't truly have our values that well aligned. When we can understand what those are and then turn it into a document called a compact, which isn't just says our value is quality, so therefore our doctors will close every care gap at every visit. But it might say, we'll close every care gap at every visit, and the organization is going to give us the capability to do that. So it brings, and actually it's a bi-directional agreement where the organization actually has to make that difference. We put this all together. There's the huddles happening at the top of the slide there with the staff and the supervisor, escalating problems as we need to. We take our values, our mission, we get our leaders out there shadowing, communicating back to the front lines. What are we really all about? What are our goals? And building essentially a virtual loop of front lines to C-suite, C-suite back to the front lines. When we can put that together, we actually create an organization that can energize innovation. Because we have frontline people who are empowered, who are aligned, and who can respond rapidly to external threats as well as to internal opportunities. Effectively, what we are is we're most adaptive to change. If you can become the organization most adaptive to change, you will outsurvive your competitors. As Darwin said, it doesn't matter how smart or strong you are, it matters how well you adapt. Of course, you don't have to do this, because as Deming reminded us, survival really is optional. So, with that, I will end and welcome questions and discussion. Are we going to do the panel next, I believe?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.